Hello, everyone, and welcome to Youth Positively Speaking. My name is Paige Ewing, and I work at Prevention Resources as the multimedia specialist for Positive Youth. Prevention Resources is a nonprofit located in New Jersey that is dedicated to promoting health and wellness of individuals, families, and community through education, collaboration, advocacy, and treatment. As always, I have with me Erin Cohen, the project coordinator of Positive Youth.
Hi everyone, Erin here, and the project coordinator for Positive Youth. And the Positive Youth Initiative focuses on building countywide capacity to reduce substance misuse among youth ages 9 to 20 here in Hunterdon County.
And so today we are joined by our two featured youth members, Mikey and Alexis. Welcome, Mikey, to the podcast. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, I'm Mikey. I'm 17. I'm a junior in high school, and I am transgender. My pronouns are they, them, or he, him. It doesn't really matter. You just use anything but she, her. That's really all I ask. So
awesome. Well, welcome, Mikey, to the podcast. And also we have Alexis. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself too, Alexis?
Hi, I'm Alexis. I am 19. I just finished my sophomore year at college where I study criminology and sociology, and I'm also like a pre-law student. And my pronouns are she, her.
Awesome. And we also have with us Jennifer Denlinger, who is our expert for this episode, but really we work with Jennifer and she's always so well with her words that we just thought that she would be a perfect person to have on. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself too, Jennifer?
Paige. Well, I do enjoy language, and I really believe in the importance of positive and respectful language to empower people. And I work as a family support advocate at the Family Support Center of Prevention Resources, where I help family members have loved ones who are in active addiction or early recovery, who have substance use disorder.
So as Jennifer kind of preface, that's the word. We're going to be talking about language today and why language is so important. And so kind of when we talk about language, a lot of people are like, oh, political correctness. And that's not really what we're talking about today. We're talking about inclusive, respectful language, and that applies to literally anything. So while we today, might talk a little bit about like race, class, gender, LGBTQ, substance use disorder, mental health, there are so many other areas that using respectful and inclusive language applies to. We would have like a 4-hour podcast if we covered it all. But that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. And I'm super excited, especially to have you, Jennifer, who works with people, especially families who have people with substance use disorder. And then we have Mikey to help us kind of represent the LGBTQ community. And then Alexis, I heard you took a class about this and you're like really interested. So tell me how you really love language.
So I first got into sociology in high school. I took an intro sociology class and took an honors level, and then even took a gender studies class. And that was kind of like the start of me, I want to say like kind of getting into the whole like language stuff, because I think it's just really important to have in your everyday life of just knowledge. And it kind of just further like blossomed as I just really have an open mind of listening to people's sides of their stories and just kind of being open to anything people want to talk about. And so that kind of influenced me more in college. I know study sociology, where racism, sexism, and just everything of human rights are really, really talked about, because that's really our society. Because sociology really studies about what we do as humans, how it influences how we think, how we act, and just how our society is further evolving, and basically like why we have like certain things, like why we talk a certain way, why are us here in Hunterdon County different than like other people like from say like California, just based on like how we were raised.
I actually like, Alexis, that you just said about how it's evolving, because really language evolves, and all of this language has been evolving over really, when Paige talks about how people are always like, oh, do we have to be politically correct and things like that? Language is evolving, because I want to tell you about this quote that I saw that I think is really, really impactful. It's by Robin Sharma, and she said, "Words can inspire and words can destroy. So choose yours well." And I think that that really encompasses everything that we're just about to talk about here.
Yeah, sometimes I think I raised my family with the phrase, is that helpful or is that hurtful?
Mm.
And a lot of what we say, we don't realize is hurtful. It's important to have these conversations.
Yeah, and I think right now, you know, we're just coming to the end of May, which is Mental Health Awareness Month, and we've been talking about stigma and we've been talking about mental health. So if we kind of just start talking about mental health, you know, when you think about words regarding mental health that can be hurtful, what do you think of? Oh, she's crazy. Oh, you know, or somebody's like, oh my gosh, my OCD is kicking in, but they really may not have OCD. Like, these are things that people say that can be hurtful. And we're really here trying to talk about why it's important to use words that are not hurtful.
And I think it's, you know, people use these words because they're just, you know, in the dictionary, and they don't realize that every single word has a meaning, and a real meaning, not just the meaning you give to it. Because especially with mental health, we use it all, the people use it all the time, where they're like, oh, you know, I have, you know, anxiety over that test. And it's like, well, is it just that the test was really hard and you were struggling with it? Or were you really having anxiety, which is a true, honest to goodness, diagnosable condition? And it's not just mental health that people use words like that all the time. They'll be like, oh, I hate that. It's so gay. And it's like, well, what does that mean? That's not what the word really means. You're just using it as almost like an insult. And so I think it's so hard for people to take those words out of their everyday language, but it's so important because to the people that those words mean something, it's really hurtful.
Yeah, I think the issue with, you know, everyone wants to make it like casual about mental health, being like, oh, we need to be talking about it more. And it's like, yes, we need to normalize it, but without taking away the severity of it. Because by just throwing around the words like, oh, my anxiety up today, or like that, my OCD, where it's like, those are very, very serious things that people deal with. And by you just throwing those words around, if you're not actually struggling with it, like diagnosed, then you're kind of downplaying like how bad it really is. And on social media and like on TikTok, it will be things like, do you have this, this, and this? Oh, you have OCD. And it's like, you can have all those things and not have OCD. Like, we as teenagers should not be diagnosing each other.
Yeah, over on TikTok, right?
Yeah, on TikTok.
So with Alexis and Mikey, so from the college perspective and the high school perspective, do you think that younger people are more aware of language now, or do you think that they're still using a lot of these things where they, you know, if we're talking about mental health and they say like, oh, so-and-so is nuts, or she's psycho, or something like that. Do you think that they're still doing that, or do you think that they're evolving some?
Honestly, this is what I've noticed at least. I think it more just depends like on the person and how they were raised. Like, I think it really all depends on like who you are, you know, because like I'll hear people say like, oh, I'm so anxious right now, or oh, like I'm so depressed. Like, no, you're really not. You know, like you're just feeling sad or you're just feeling down. But it's really to me it just depends on the person. But for most of our generation, I do think that it's like we are becoming more aware of that kind of stuff.
I think for me, I'm a little biased in this fact because I do go to a university that is a little bit more like on the liberal side. So I think some on more liberal ideas, like they're a little more careful about like saying things about like, oh, that's so gay, because like it's just sometimes more aware of that, especially at like young age. Like kind of what I would say, like when I say liberal, I don't really mean so much the political context. I more kind of think of like this millennial Gen Z of open-mindedness is kind of now how it's being like recoined of a definition. But also in my classes, I'm surrounded by a lot of other sociology and anthropology students who like we were taught all of like what the actual words mean in back like in your intro level classes. Like you learn about like the right words to use when you're reading your papers, because your teachers will call you out. Like I had a teacher, and love this professor, he's great, and it was all of sociology is coined by white straight old men, and so they use the word man a lot to mean people. So it's okay to, when you're quoting people, to use the word man, but as sociologists today, we should not be using the word like man-made. It's people-made, it's human-made. And I think those are just like really important things to like think about. Like there's even this thing, it's called like the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. It's all about how basically language influence our world today, and basically how we act, think, and all that. So we have a lot of words that are kind of more masculine dominated, and like I'm in a co-ed fraternity. Why is it called a fraternity? If there's fraternities for males, sororities are for girls, why is it fraternity if it's co-ed? And I think even that stuff still influences at a college level, because they're like, oh, you're in a fraternity, like that's for men. And it's kind of weird. It's like, why is there not just its own name for it?
I just want to point out one thing before we keep going on. Alexis, when I talked to her about coming on this episode, Alexis was like, I don't really belong on this episode. I'm not in one of these communities. I don't know, what can I bring to the table? I'm a cisgender woman, right? And I said, you're exactly who we need, because we want everyone, Alexis, not just people in these communities, to be able to use the correct terminology. And I think that your knowledge is so valuable to us. So I am glad you're on here, and I'm glad I convinced you to come on, even though you were going, I'm not really in the community, and do I belong? And my voice, yes, your voice is important because you are using the correct language, and you know how important language is.
And not only that, it's the people who aren't in the communities that need to do the most work most of the time. We're the ones who need to read, and we need to research, and we need to go to workshops and symposiums, and we need to kind of put it on ourselves to learn instead of always having people in the communities to teach us. Because like, how exhausting is that? You know, to constantly have to like self-advocate and be like, oh yes, I'm a part of this community. Here, education. Like we should really be doing our own education and reading our own and staying up to date our own.
Yeah, because part of the issue is a lot of in these like communities, whether it's race, gender, sexuality, all of the like people's voices get oppressed a lot. So it's important to still give like on those platforms, make sure people like their voices are getting heard. And I think sometimes people are like, oh, you're overreacting. Like, why? Like, sit down. Like, why are you talking? Like, it's getting too much. And I think the issue is a lot of these people have been oppressed for so long that you have to go to the extreme in order to be back in the middle. Even with just simple like gender disparities. Like, why are we still having to argue about equality of gender? And people are like, oh, you're going so extreme to the other end. It's like you have to, because you've been oppressed for so long that you have to go to that extreme to be met back in the middle. And that's why some people say with like the Black Lives Matter movement and just like, you know, talking so much about race right now, it's to the like it's so extreme and it's so over the top, and it's like that's like you have to, because that is the only way that those voices will get heard and back in the middle of equality.
Mm-hmm. And so Jennifer, also, you know, so we've been talking a lot about mental health, but a big thing about mental health that kind of goes hand in hand is also substance use and also substance use disorder. And so you work with families who have members who have substance use disorder, or, you know, something like that. Can you talk a little bit about like why language is, what you've seen and why language is so important, like where you work?
Sure. So you're absolutely right. Substance use disorder is actually a disease of the brain, and it is considered to be a mental health disorder. What happens a lot with families is that they feel judged. They feel that you know, people have opinions on how they should handle the person that they love who's struggling, and words get tossed around that are really loaded, like even even enabling, which we've all heard that term. Oh, you're enabling your loved one, you're helping them drink. It's your fault is what the person is hearing. And you're enabling the history of that word is it came from a place of love. It's if you love somebody and you're trying to help them, but things get out of balance when somebody has substance use disorder. So there are words that are really damaging, like addict and junkie. If you label somebody a junkie, do you think, how will they behave? They're probably going to rise to your expectation. But if you talk about somebody who's in recovery, then that's a positive spin on it. And that is going to help not only the person who has been diagnosed or who's struggling, but the family as well. When we hear recovery, we don't hear shame. We hear positive motion, right? We hear getting better, and it is possible to get better. So that is a big thing that we talk about a lot, how to handle the judgment that we might even get from our own extended family, or just the fear of stigma. And that then, as you mentioned early in this podcast, is it's an obstacle then to getting help. If we don't normalize some of this conversation, then we're afraid to speak out and even look for help. But if we can talk about it, then maybe we're more approachable for other people and they're not so fearful to ask for help.
Yeah, we actually just learned about this, well, not just, I learned about it like last year in English. It's like the words connotation and denotation. So denotation is like the dictionary definition of a word, and connotation is like the feeling that the word gives, I guess. So like the words junkie and like addict have like really bad connotation because you don't want to be called an addict if you're addicted to something, and like in recovery has like a good connotation. So it's just what that reminded me of.
Well, that's a really good point, Mikey. That's a really good point. And when we talk about somebody who has substance use disorder, that's like, let's think of somebody who has asthma. I had a child with asthma, and I learned early on, I'm not going to label her as asthmatic because she's much more than this disease of asthma. Same thing. Maybe I have a loved one who struggles with addiction, but if I label that person as an addict, then that's all I'm seeing. And it's really not my place to do that.
Mm-hmm. And I think
connotation is exactly right. It's what hits you with that word.
And I think that's what's so important is that you have to focus on the people, not the traits. Mm-hmm. Because when you use a word like, oh, somebody's handicapped or somebody, they're blind. Well, then that's focusing more on the trait than the person rather than saying a person with a disability or a person with a vision impairment. Then you're talking about the person that they have this other thing, but you're focusing on the person themselves, not these external traits, because that's not who defines us. Who defines us is who we are as people.
Very well put.
And there's research that stands behind it. So for people in recovery, when they hear language that's positive, the research stands behind the fact that they do better in recovery than when they are called something that has that negative connotation.
Which helps all of us, doesn't it? We want a community with healthy people, mm-hmm. and we want to know that we can get better. So yeah, I think it helps everybody. It helps the community at large, and it helps the individual, it helps the family, it helps all of us.
Yeah, and I think it just helps reduce stigma in general, because when you are not in, I work on the prevention side of things. Jennifer, you work with the families that are in active addiction, and you work with a lot of people who are in recovery. I don't see that as much. And I think that stigma arises for people that don't know it, right? If they are not really in it and seeing it, and they don't understand how damaging it can be. But stigma is there because of words like junkie and addict. And, they think it's a choice and things like that, instead of exactly what you just said, Jennifer, which is that it's a brain disease.
That's actually the next point I wanted to make, that it's a moral choice somehow. And,
right.
There are people who are genetically predisposed to addiction, and there are many, many reasons people get addicted. And it's not just a matter of saying no. It can be much more complicated than that. Saying no is a good thing to do,
Right, right. Yeah, it is. I still, I say it, I think I've said it in several of our episodes before, but we had this doctor from Yale who talked about somebody who has substance use disorder. It's that he equated it to if you were holding your breath. And when you're holding your breath, the only thing you can think about is what? Taking a breath, right? And he said that that's what it's like in your brain when you are wanting more of that drug. The only thing you can think about is that drug. So it doesn't matter if you have to steal from your grandmother, because if you were holding your breath, you would jump out a window to get a breath because your body needs it. And he talked about it with drugs that way. And I just thought it was the best explanation I had ever heard.
So while we're talking about this, I think it's really interesting too, that, you know, kind of going back a little bit, we were talking about how language is always changing and is constantly evolving. And so people are always like, oh, okay, substance use disorder, got it. Like that's the new terminology. But also another community that is, I feel, always adding new words, which is amazing, is the LGBTQ community, and using new words to help, you know, identify who a person is. Like, can you talk a little bit about that, Mikey, and like why language is so important in that community?
Yeah. So I'm trying to think. I'm sorry. So I think it's important just because like if like for most people, like I know it's like this for me, if you don't have a label, like you just kind of feel lost. And like a lot of people are like, well, labels don't really matter, but like in the grand scheme of things, yes, they do, because you know everyone puts a label on everyone, and like there's like new terms like pan-romantic and bi-romantic and all that kind of stuff, which is like it's great. Like I love it, and like I identify with some of them too. So it's, I don't know, I just think it's really cool that and it's important. Yeah, this is just the point that I was trying to make.
So, Mikey, when you talk to people and you tell people that you want to be called they or them or he, his, and somebody doesn't do that, can you tell me a little bit about how that makes you feel when that happens?
It's not fun. it's not fun. It like struggling with dysphoria. I think it all comes back to mental health. It really, it's not a good feeling. It kind of feels like just like a punch in the gut a little bit, because it's like, oh, I told you that this is how I identify and you're just not respecting that. And you know, it was really hard when I first came out, because like I cut my hair and I asked people to call me like this name and these pronouns, and you know, it was fine when people messed up and then they corrected themselves, because like I understand that people mess up, you can make mistakes, it's okay. But it's when people would like blatantly like call me my dead name, or like she, her, like it's like you're just blatantly disrespecting me. Can you not do that, please? You know.
And it feels very affirming when people use the correct terminology, and and it helps you in the way that you feel.
Yeah, definitely. I remember the first time my older sister called me her brother, I started crying. It was oh my gosh, I'm gonna cry again. It was so sweet.
Well, I want to just point out a little something that people won't know unless we tell them right now, but Mikey is my nephew. And I remember we have a close relationship, and I had been seeing on social media that Mikey's name was on there opposed to Mikey's dead name. And we were talking over FaceTime one day, and it was kind of like the little elephant, well, the big elephant in the room. And I finally said, so tell me what's going on. And Mikey said, I don't know if you've seen my social media. And I said, I have. And I said, what do you want me to call you? And you remember you said, Mikey, is that okay? And I said, is that what you want me to call you? I'll call you that. And I mess up from time to time, right? I always, we're talking, and all of a sudden I go, oh, sorry, I've been calling you that for a long time. It's going to take me a while. But
yeah, it's completely fine, especially with family. But it's like with family, I get it, because you guys have known me for 17 years, and then I just ask you to call me by a different name, it's like, well, I won't be able to do that immediately. But, it's like, it's with people that like I just meet that like disrespect my pronouns and like my name. Like, even, okay, there was this one time I was with this girl. We were like hanging out, and she knew my dead name because like we had been friends for a little bit, and she found it out somehow. And she was trying to get my attention, and I couldn't hear her calling my name, so she yells my dead name like across the room. And I remember I almost went off on her. It was not fun. I get very mad whenever people do stuff like that because it's just rude. It's disrespectful. Like,
is it helpful or is it hurtful?
Exactly.
We use words that we know are hurting somebody, and it goes back to the lack of respect. And I think, for all of these issues we're talking about, it's the inherent worth and dignity of every individual. That's what we're trying to respect.
Yeah.
I think what's really like important, because I try to talk to with people a lot of like the generations above us, because they're always like, I can't keep up with all of you youngins and your words and your labels. And just remind yourself that like gender, and even there's again even like sex, sexuality, all of them are socially constructed. Like, us humans made them, so we can change them however many times we want. There was no written handbook of how gender, sex, or sexuality was supposed to be out. So we're allowed to change it. Socially constructed just means like there's no objective thing of what it has to be just because humans created it. Like, no one ever said there had to be male, female. Like, that was just never written anywhere just because some other generations decided it had to be. So just now, all these other like people that they call like newer labels have been around forever. They've been there for a very long time. It's just now that we're opening it up to be more accepting and more open-minded to just like, someone wants to be called this, you're like, yeah, sure. You're like, I don't have to understand it. I just have to respect you as a person being like, I want to be called this.
And I think you make a really good point with that, Alexis, because I always think about when people get so up in arms about things, whether it's, the they, them, or if somebody's bi or pansexual or any of these terms that are newer for a lot of people, is that it's not hurting you. If, it doesn't hurt me if Mikey says, this is how I want to be identified. It doesn't hurt me at all. So in anybody, if you see somebody on the news and they're, you're watching it and they say something that you don't agree with, it's not hurting you personally. So that's where I don't understand with a lot of people. It is going quickly, and I think it's hard to keep up. And even myself, sometimes I'm like, okay, wait, what's this mean? And what is this? Even when you were saying cisgender, I don't use the term cisgender, but yeah. I know that that's what I am.
I was talking to my mom about that. She was like, I've never heard what is that? She's like, what does that mean? Like, thinking that it meant this like other thing that I was like coming out, this whole thing. And I was like, no, all cisgender means is that your sex assigned to you at birth matches your gender identity. And the reason why it's so important to still sometimes use the word cisgender is because by just go around like, all women, when you say women, that means all women. That means even if you transgendered woman, that means all women. Women's rights includes and affects everybody. So when you're talking about like, say like your gender identity, because sometimes like you have different privileges as a cisgender woman that a transgender woman doesn't get the privilege to have. It's like sometimes they face a lot more repercussions of being like, you're not a real woman and all those other things. And it's like, trust me, it's like we're all women together. We all face the backlash of a lot of things. So it's important to, when you're talking about women, like you mean all women.
Yeah. And I think that's, oh, go ahead, Mikey.
Oh, no, I wasn't going to say anything. I was just saying, yeah.
Okay. But I think all of you make such great points in that the words you use matter, and the words you use have an impact on the people that are hearing them. Whether you're saying a word to somebody's face or you're posting it on Facebook into the world, your words have an impact. And so just be kind and make sure that if you make a mistake, because it's gonna happen. I have done it. I'm sure all of us have done it where we used a word and somebody said, that's actually not the word we use anymore. You apologize, you ask what the right word is, then you use it. And you have to, learn. And if you make that mistake again, then it's on you.
You try to be that person who speaks out that, hey, there's a better word to use.
Mm-hmm.
We can speak out too. I think that's a big piece of it. I think you mentioned early on, we educate ourselves. That's on us. We need to educate ourselves. We need to examine ourselves closely in the words we use. We need to catch ourselves, speak out when we see stigma in action. All of those things that's how we can minimize stigma right now, is just support people.
And I like how you said about sticking up for people too, and speaking out, because a lot of times it's hard for people when you're in that situation, if you see something, to speak up, but really speaking up lets people know that it's not okay. It's not okay.
It doesn't need to be confrontational. And I think that's sometimes what happens. We're afraid to speak up. We don't want to cause a scene, but there are kind, respectful, gentle ways to just remind people like, hey, that word isn't so cool. Or there's a better way to say this, or have you ever considered it?
Yeah. And offering the alternative, saying, oh, you know what? Actually, we don't use that word anymore. Here's what we say. And be like, oh, okay, great. Thank you. And then we've done a little bit of education.
Yeah. And I'm going to say I have such hope because of young people like Mikey and Alexis. The fact is, I was having a similar conversation with people closer to my age a couple of weeks ago, and they were questioning different words and wanting to understand the meaning behind the words originally. And language changes. That's one of the first things you brought up today. Language changes, and it's okay. So I'm happy to follow younger people taking the lead on this and embracing it. It's not threatening. It's interesting, actually, if you look at the use of words and how they've changed.
Yeah, well, I just want to say thank you all so much for joining us on the podcast today, for telling us about your experiences, for telling us about your language learning, how it's constant life learning. But for more information about building inclusive languages, please visit our website at njprevent.com/positive youth. And thank you for listening in. We'll see you next time for more Youth Positively Speaking.